Okay, so again, the documentation of the history of graphic design has always been recorded in a very Eurocentric, and I'm going to do my best to not only take that point of view, but I will say I've been frustrated in my own research in trying to find other points of view, and there's just not a lot available. There's this one book that's coming out that I'm on the waiting list for, that someone has been working on, an author that I really like. So I'm going to do my best. So bear with me. You're going to see a good amount of white men presented in this, but I'm going to show how that they were not the inventors of their style and how they were actually borrowing heavily from the Japanese, predominantly in the early parts of when we're picking up, which is around the turn of the 19th century, so the late 1800s. So with that, and I am going to vary some of my presentations. It's this battle between what you were expected to know and
You just have to Google in other languages, maybe.
yeah.
And then you'll have no idea what you're looking at. But it's like
Well, and then that's the other part too, when you're not if I'm not whatever. I'm just trying to say I'm aware of the Eurocentric point of view, and I'm trying to shift it as much as I can. And yeah. So with that, awkward, was that one of our emotions? Awkward, which I do think that word awkward itself looks awkward with all those angles in it, the two W's in it and everything, and then that K slicing. I love that word. I do awkward very well. So with that, here we go. I can't seem to, there we go. So we're going to start with arts and crafts. So again, we're right around late 1800s, start of the turn of the century. Industrial revolutions happening, and we are going to start in Britain with the arts and crafts movement. It took place roughly from 1880 to 1920, but it did spread internationally, and it did affect design, craft, and architecture by resurfacing an appreciation for handcrafted objects. And a lot of this is setting the basis for what we think of design now as, and also a lot of this influenced education and design, and really putting an emphasis on the applied arts as opposed to only the fine arts. Really, the father of arts and crafts is considered to be William Morris. He and his contemporaries advocated for the beauty of traditional craftsmanship and embraced anti-industrial methods of reproduction. He was very much a key figure in defining the arts and crafts movement, is known for designing everything from social reform. He was very much a socialist in a lot of ways, and he was very much an advocate and a theorist as well, as someone who designed wallpaper and and textiles and book covers and typefaces and even some furniture. So he did a lot beyond just making some really gorgeous wallpapers and textiles. So he has a quote that says, "Have nothing in your house that you do not know to be useful or believe to be beautiful." I should follow that a little more carefully, I think. And who's the woman who has this show about uncluttering now? I can't think of her name, but she has a phrase that she says.
Marie Kondo, yeah.
Yeah. So she wasn't exactly the inventor of that phrase. It goes back a long time. So here's some of his work. The arts and crafts movement itself embraced emphasis on both form and function. So that's, again, kind of the basis of design, form and function. Those two things cannot really be divorced. And many of his designs are still in production today. And he also very much embraced this not having a distinction between the designer and the artisan who created it. He thought all should be considered the same. There's no hierarchy, meaning between those who designed and the artisans who actually made. So he was very much concerned with how objects were made. He opposed the industrialization of production, and in his writings and speeches, he addressed economic and social reform. He very much advocated for better working conditions for designers. He opposed the ways objects were being mass produced in industrialized Britain. And he contested the poor working conditions of factory workers, the long hours with little concern for health, safety, and low wages. So he was a big advocate. Again, he did not see any distinction from, say, he himself, who was the designer, to those who would labor and create and craft his. He thought everyone was equal. And he was very against, really turning people into machine-like positions. So he fought to eliminate the division of labor between the artists and craftsmen. So what we're looking at here on the left is a tapestry, a textile, and then on the one on the right is a painting. It's his wallpaper. It's really beautiful, very lots of nature, a lot of natural influences, but stylizing, not just completely perfectly trying to emulate exactly what a flower looks like, but using them as reference and stylizing from them. He also opened a publishing studio just outside of London called Kelmscott Press, and he created small editions of books that featured extraordinary craftsmanship. In these books that he produced, he did everything. He created his own inks, he created his own paper, he created his own typefaces, he hand bound them. So they were really exquisitely made and exquisitely crafted in every detail. And he was fortunate enough to get the rights, I guess, or was asked to publish the work of Chaucer, who was kind of the author of the time. So this was a very lucrative opportunity for him. And what we're looking at here is some of his, up here's the logo for Kelmscott Press. This is different typefaces that he designed. And then this is some of the work that he was designing for the work of Chaucer. So you can see, again, all of these references to nature, quite decorative, incredibly well crafted. Not a lot of negative space going in there. I wouldn't say minimalism goes hand in hand with arts and crafts. And then another theorist and buddy of him was John Ruskin. He said to banish imperfection is to destroy expression. So this is very anti-industrialization and the making of everything the same. So he really thought that the handmade and to have those marks of the hand were really expression and not thought of as imperfection. He also said I think I copied this wrong. We're not intended to act with accuracy of tools that makes their fingers measure degrees like cogwheels and their arms strike curves like compasses. You must dehumanize them. So he's very much against, again, the poor working conditions of the increasingly industrialized Britain. Another major player from arts and craft is Augustus Pugin, who did the design for Westminster Palace. This was in 1859. And in this, the amount of detail and everything was considered, from the wallpaper to the furniture to every aspect of it was very carefully designed, but it was super informed by these illuminated manuscripts. So it was actually looking back in time and being informed by them, but then kind of modernizing it in a way. Here you can see he was looking at these different illuminated manuscripts. These are actually Morris's illuminated manuscripts, but he also, it was almost like Morris was living in the past. He was so anti-industrialization and he looked to earlier designs for influence while trying to make it of the moment. Here you can see the face of Big Ben, where you can see that in the design of this, it is really referencing some of the work that Morris was doing in these illuminated manuscripts. So at just a larger scale. Then we have Owen Jones. I thought he was really interesting. He wrote this book called The Grammar of Ornament. He was an English designer and an architect and a writer. And he was really known for this standard work treating both Eastern and Western design motifs. So I found him very interesting because he wasn't just looking as inclusively. And he wrote this book in 1856, which presented a systematic pictorial collection emphasizing both the use of color and the application and logical principles of design of everyday objects. So he had rules about placement, rules about how patterns should repeat, how patterns can be used. He too also very much felt like instead of simply So he was looking at a whole lot of different cultures in terms of these patterns and creating this, again, rationale or rules or of the grammar of the ornament. And he definitely advocated if you were working with, like, say, trying to recreate, like, nature was a huge influence throughout. But he felt like there was no point in perfectly painting a flower as a flower looks, but instead to be informed by the style and to stylize it as opposed to just trying to recreate it. Because what's the point? Nature's already done that. At the same time, so this was all happening in Britain. So this arts and crafts movement, which really brought back this attention to the handmade, attention to a materiality, um, um, trying to break down the division between designers and the artisans who would make them, and a really better working conditions. Over in Glasgow, the writings and the lectures of these guys of Pugin and Morris and Ruskin traveled. So in Scotland, the school, Glasgow School of Art, started, and then this group called the Glasgow Four really embraced these decorative elements and the attention to craft. And what I thought was really interesting about them is this main four, were this man, Charles Mackintosh and Herbert McNair, but then these two sisters, Margaret and Frances MacDonald. So what we're looking at here is actually Margaret MacDonald. I couldn't find any pictures of Frances. You're going to see that they use the decorative elements of arts and crafts, but they also use these very bold, thick, irregular, elongated forms. And what this is moving toward is moving toward the next movement that starts to evolve. And it sort of started here, and that's going to be moving into Art Nouveau. So we're seeing these very dramatic, long lines, these elongated lines, this really interesting use of type and how the type almost seems to be growing. They're really locking the type in, and parts of it are extending out and locking together. And we're also definitely starting to see some Japanese influence coming in here, specifically the woodcut, the woodblock prints. But one thing that the school was fairly groundbreaking in is that it had a lot of women as the designers, more so than anywhere else. And a lot of these women went on to have quite strong careers. And it was somewhat because of the arts and crafts movement brought attention to the art of the book. And a lot of these women were illustrators. And so this role as illustrators got elevated. So they didn't mean they got paid any better. They still were receiving a lower wage, but they were receiving a higher, what's the word? I don't know. I can't think of the word I want to say here, but they were perceived at a higher level because now they were not just maybe the secretaries or whatnot, they were actually the illustrators and the designers. And this school was predominantly, as you can see, had a lot of female students and designers. So one of them that emerged from is this woman, Ethel Larcombe. And these are some of her, she was an illustrator and book designer. As you can see, some of her really beautiful book covers with, again, these stylized botanicals and elongated forms, and then just these really interesting typefaces. And then one thing about the Glasgow Four that made them a little, they weren't that famous, but they did produce some really interesting work. And they definitely liked kind of the darker look and a little bit moodier look than some that was necessarily completely in vogue. And this was one of their, one of the designers or illustrators that they really were inspired by. His name is Aubrey Beardsley. And he was kind of, again, we're moving toward transitioning to Art Nouveau. And he was very much on that precipice where things were shifting more toward the Art Nouveau. And his work was very kind of decadent and erotic. I couldn't even, like, some of the things I didn't feel comfortable showing you guys. There's also not a ton of it out there, but I do recommend if you like kind of the dark, really kind of strange work, to look up his work. But he doesn't have a ton of work because he did die at an early age from tuberculosis. And he was very much influenced by these Japanese woodcuts. And now I think we see it's, you know, there's a lot of influence still going on, and it's almost come full circle in some ways with all the anime and the manga being very popular still. But this is some of Aubrey Beardsley's work. particularly the ones that I felt comfortable showing. They're almost all black and white. They have these incredible, like, so this feeling of these illustrations definitely has the same kind of stylistic voice as, say, a woodcut would, with these large amounts of positive and negative spaces. And it is shifting and moving toward, from the arts and crafts movement, which was very much about the handcrafted and very botanical and very ornate still, to moving into the Art Nouveau, which still is highly botanical as well, but it is more modern in its design language, and it has these organic forms. Really, if you think of Art Nouveau, you're going to think of these bold, bold outlines, these whiplash curves, these sinuous lines, that these elongated forms. And so the Art Nouveau designers sought to escape the popular historical styles and really were favoring more of these linear lines from Japanese print forms that spoke of movement and progress. So getting away from kind of the super decorative into more stylistic. And they also sought to break down the traditional distinction between the fine arts and the applied arts. So this is when, again, everything's moving for more appreciation. And when we say applied arts, we're more thinking of things like graphic design or arts that have a purpose rather than are more expressive, more of an intent to them, like an attempt to communicate something very specific as opposed to abstractly. So the distinguishing ornamental characteristics of Art Nouveau are its undulating asymmetrical lines. They're often taking the forms of flower stalks and buds and vines and tendrils and insect wings and other delicate sinuous natural objects. The lines can really be very elegant and graceful, but they also have this very powerful rhythmic and whip-like force to them that we're seeing here. We see these beautiful undulating lines, but there's a power to them. There's an energy to them. There's like movement to them. And this all grew out of the arts and crafts movement that was basically shepherded by William Morris. This is all, again, at the turn of the 19th century and the start of the 20th century. But it was certainly influenced heavily by, I don't know if I say this right, ukiyo-e movement in Japan. And this was because Japan opened up to international trade right about at the same time. So there was more communication between Asia and Europe. And then this process, the ukiyo-e, was this elaborate process of creating these woodblock prints. And the use of space, color, and decorative patterns very much inspired the same elements in Art Nouveau and many others. So you can see here on the left, we have this ukiyo woodblock print by Hashimoto I don't know how to say it, if it's Chikano Ubu. I might get there if I practice it more. And then the one on the right is an illustrator from in the Art Nouveau style, because you can really see how heavily influenced the work is. And then the other thing though you want to think about with Art Nouveau, this was a time, so Art Nouveau started in Paris. And this was a time of very much of middle-class prosperity, very much of pleasure-seeking and grandiose bourgeois lifestyle. This is Louis Fuller. She's actually an American who moved to Paris to become this really, really entrepreneur and avant-garde performer. And she really epitomized Art Nouveau, because she was trying out new forms, and she would create all her own costumes. She would create all her own lighting. She would create all these incredible performances of dance, and it was an art form. And she was one of the it girls at that time. And I believe she's from the Midwest, which I think is really interesting. That's this Midwest girl moves to Paris and becomes this it girl, and is just this incredible entrepreneur. And I'm going to see how I say ukiyo-e. Is that better? Ichiro, ukiyo-e?
Yeah, that's much better.
Ukiyo-e. Okay. So Louis Fuller, though, she was, again, just this like really does embody what Art Nouveau is, which was, taking new forms, modernizing these very strong lines. So physically, the way she embodied it was very, very Art Nouveau. And it was very celebratory. And these are these posters, and what these performances, like this really started this whole, like basically Paris became an outdoor gallery because these posters were for advertising these events, and they were just put up all over the streets of Paris, and it became like really almost an art form in a way. And one of the main producers of these is someone that we know from the art world, which is Henri Toulouse-Lautrec. He is also known as a painter, but he really turned and loved the form of graphic design because of its immediacy and its exposure. And it was a much more a quick and immediate communication that had a wider spread. You didn't have to go into a gallery. He said, my posters are pasted on the walls of Paris. And he produced a lot of posters specifically for some of these events that would feature another one of these performers, Jane Avril, as well as Louis Fuller. And they were not meant to be precious. They were not meant to be studied. They were meant to be exuberant. They were meant to be full of life. They were meant to embody movement and excitement. And just this, like, a lust for enjoyment. Like, it was a burgeoning bourgeoisie society at this time. So you see all this just incredible exuberant energy happening. So again, and then many of these works, you're going to see it throughout. When you see Art Nouveau works, you're going to see often that they do feature a large dynamic female figure in the foreground. And then these features that are inspired by the ukiyo-e, did I do that better? Ukiyo-e woodblock prints. So you can see here, this is Jane Avril, who is another famous performer of the time, kind of one of the it girls. And then you can see this Toulouse-Lautrec's famous poster featuring her, but you can definitely see how it was influenced over here. Then we have Mucha, Alphonse Mucha. I think this guy is such a character. His work is really quite amazing. His father actually paid for him to go study in Paris because at that time, Paris was the epicenter of the art world, but he didn't find immediate success. So what he did is he took up this job in a print shop, kind of as his side hustle. And he was at this job, and he was there over the holidays, like the Christmas holidays. And he was the only one there because everyone had left for vacation. And he was like low on the totem pole, right? So he was the only one who couldn't get Christmas vacation. So he was there working. And this this actress, Sarah Bernhardt, who also was very famous at that time, came rushing in because she needed a poster for one of her performances. And so he made it on the fly right there, and she fell in love with it. And this began this very long lasting relationship between them, this artistic relationship, working relationship, where he pretty much produced all her posters. He helped with costuming for her. He helped produce jewelry. So it was and she was very famous at this time. So to me, this is a great story about, like, you never know when opportunity is going to knock. And even though it might be Christmas Eve and you might be working late hours and you don't want to be there, if somebody runs in, like, knock it out of the park, man, because you never know what might happen. And that's what he did. Also, though, with Mucha's work, you're going to see this heavy influence of the Japanese wood blocks. So we can see here, you look over here, you see these beautiful cherry blossoms that you see consistently throughout his work. So these are specifically ones for Sarah Bernhardt as well. And so his posters, by the way, did I put the picture in? It's just not him, his posters. I have a picture somewhere of him. These are huge. These are like almost life size in terms of the female figure. So the actual poster itself could be as tall as like almost 6 feet. So they were these really huge, beautiful posters. There's some more. And then here, as I was saying, he designed a lot of different things for Bernhardt, including jewelry and some of her wardrobe as well, her costumes. And another main designer from Art Nouveau is definitely Jules Chéret. He was a French designer and a businessman, so he was really good at selling things, and that's what he mostly did. He really created and posters that would advertise and sell almost anything. He is considered kind of the father of the poster, and he created over 1,000 Art Nouveau posters. So if you've seen posters, there's a good chance that are, you know, labeled as Art Nouveau. There's a very good chance it was either Jules Chauret or Toulouse-Lautrec or Mucha, but Mucha's look is very distinct even within this. He did always try to keep a distinct voice. But again, Chauret was a businessman, and so he made posters to sell everything and anything. But the common thing they always had is they always featured a very specific subject matter of a blonde, sporty, rosy lips, sentimental female figure. It was this idea of this modern woman. They even became this nickname for him. But you can see even in these, you can see this influence of, again, the Japanese woodblock with these color blocking and the use of the flowers in these really stylized forms and blocks of color, as opposed to a ton of detail in them. So actually these girls, it actually became a term, the charrettes, and they were meant to be these modern women who could do everything, like ride a bike in a dress, which was considered a modern thing to do. And another big and important one in terms of Art Nouveau is Eugène Grasset. He's a Swiss decorative artist who worked in Paris, France, in a variety of fields, and he is considered one of the pioneers in Art Nouveau design. He almost always showed women in profile. So again, if you see a poster where it's a woman in profile, it's very well could be Grasset's work. And again, they were also very influenced by these wonderful woodcuts. You can see in the way that they're treating the hair, again, the blocking of the color, the lack of the detail in the background. Again, here's another note the profile. But what I'm looking at here is how he's even kind of he designed typefaces. We're going to see another one of his typefaces coming up. And you can see here it is being influenced by the Japanese characters even. So here's this Parisian department store that actually is still in existence, I believe, that features lettering by him. So you can see these botanical influences around the letters, but the letters themselves even feel to be growing in a way that kind of mimics the idea of plants or botanics. And the last one we're going to talk about in terms of Art Nouveau is Hector Guimard. And he was hired to design these openings and entries for a few of the metros. I think he only did 4 of them. And the idea was, this was when the metro was first being introduced, and they didn't want it to be scary for people to have to go underground. They thought it would be scary. So they tried to make these really warm and inviting and kind of fancy entrances to encourage people to take advantage of them and use it. And they too were very much influenced by Japanese pagodas. Oops, I didn't mean to put that in there. So to conclude, both the arts and crafts movement and Art Nouveau sought to break down the division between fine art and applied art. Arts and crafts started in Britain. It denounced industrialization in favor of artisan-made objects and publications, and focused on a fitness in design. The theories, it was moving past the overly decorative work that was in favor prior, and really did not think that a thing needed decoration unless it fit with the object itself. And these theories of Morris and Rishkin really traveled and influenced and continued to influence other art movements. So then Art Nouveau grew out of arts and crafts movement during this time of the burgeoning middle class in Paris. And the style features a dynamic, asymmetrical designs, often mostly featuring women and this modern lifestyle. And then we're going to look at Jugendstil, which was happening around the same time in Germany. And then we're going to look at the Secessionists in Austria right now. So tell me, are you seeing something that says Jugendstil? There's a share work, okay? Yeah. So we're going to continue, same time, but we're going to move around Europe here. And we're going to move over to Germany. And Jugendstil is also, what that stands for is the style of the youth. And it is the German counterpart to Art Nouveau. It too embodies these ideas of youth, heroism and national optimism expressed through art, design, and architecture. It very much aligned with the development of German statehood. So the magazine that really, so a lot of these movements are going to have magazines for disseminating their ideas. Obviously back then there wasn't Instagram, there wasn't online anything. There was, so a lot of their information was either giving speeches and traveling around and creating these kind of pop-up events. And then they would promote it also with these magazines. So the magazine for Jugendstil was just called Jugend, and and this cover really embodies what it was about, because it shows these two younger maidens dragging around an old man, and it's really saying out with the old, in with the new. And the magazine itself was founded by Gaillard Earth, and the ideas of youth, and at its height there was over 200,000 readers, which is pretty impressive considering the way that these were made and then distributed. So it says, youth is joy in being, the capacity for enjoyment, hope, and love, faith in people. Youth is color, form, and life. That's kind of the Jugend manifesto. And here we have another cover. You can see how it's communicating that visually as well. We have this idea of youth, color, life, and even I love looking at their typefaces because they also have this feeling of being from nature. So these magazines were very essential for the disseminating ideas about modernism. The content is about art, politics, science, design, and writing. They're very much connecting art with other ideas. Love this. So one of the designers associated with Jugend is Josef Weitzel. Here you can see, I freaking love these. I love how this, I don't know what you call this on a dress because it's like a bow in the front. So it's not really a bustle, but it flows down and then it spells the letters down here. I think that transition is really interesting. And then you look up here at this type, how it has this almost wood grain to it. And again, we're seeing these color blocks that emulate this idea, those woodcut prints. I think that's really, like, check out that like strong focal point being created by these lines that radiate out from behind this female figure. And one of the influences for Jugend was Ernst Haeckel, and he was he studied nature. He wasn't a designer, but he was an incredible illustrator. And I'm sure you probably have seen some of his works. He like discovered, I don't know, thousands and thousands of different kinds of organisms, and then he would illustrate them, and they were just freaking beautiful. I've always loved his work, like incredibly intricate, so delicate, and just incredibly well crafted. So definitely he was an influence. He wasn't considered a designer, but he's an illustrator, and definitely they were looking to his work for influence. And then one of the very famous pieces from Jugend is this, and this theme, the kiss, was actually very much a theme consistently throughout this time period. Think of Gustav Klimt's kiss, think of the other one. But this is by Peter Behrens. And it, again, you're seeing these curves that we are associating with Art Nouveau. So this is why this is the German version of Art Nouveau. So you see these like really strong, bold marks, bold lines, and these undulating curves. And then again, this is very much was a theme. You have monks or Gustav Klimt's painting, also entitled The Kiss. And this one was particularly interesting because it does feature these androgynous lovers. He also then created a typeface. He was an architect as well. So a lot of these designers did multiple things, but he was very interested in this idea of movement and nature. So even in this typeface, he was trying to capture that movement. You can argue whether or not you think he was successful, but that was his goal really with this. And he says, not necessary. He says, watching a bird's flight or the gallop of a horse both seem graceful and pleasing, but the viewer does not observe the details, only their movement, only the rhythm of the line is seen. So he's really trying to create a movement even in his typefaces. Another one from Uganda is Bruno Paul. I thought his work, I love his work because I think it's very strange. And again, you're seeing the influence of those woodcut, those beautiful woodcut prints. But I think it's interesting to look at his typefaces as well. They seem to be also have like a very rhythmic approach to the typeface. And the name of what this poster is for this first political cabaret in Germany. It was called the 11 Executioners. To me, this seems so very German, and it's kind of odd. I don't know, odd, kind of funny presentation. And he founded the United Workshop for Arts and Crafts. It was a commercial organization to foster Jugendstil, and it was actually in Munich, so it was moving it and disseminating it further. So in addition to graphic design, he was an architect and a furniture designer. And his work really embodies this optimism about design and its potential to change society. They really were trying to communicate the importance of design and how it can what's the word I want to say, even things out. So he very much promoted practical craftsmanship as the basics of artistic education, and he emphasized the training of professional designers for the applied arts and industries. So he really started establishing a precedent that continues in schools of design now. So he really believed in this professional training of designers in their different crafts to be considered professionals as well, not to be thought of anything lesser than, but to really be considered as a profession, and that the craft of it was very important, and that there should be an education. Just like if you go to law school, you become a lawyer, right? You go to med school, you become a doctor. You go to design school, you become a designer. He wanted it to be that same. And that really started setting the stage to how design is still taught to this day. And at the same time, over in Vienna were the Secessionists. They were a group of painters, designers, and architects who objected to the very conservative nature of Austrian fine art. Actually, Vienna was quite large at this time, and it was becoming somewhat of a hub for art and design. And they were rebelling against the conservative nature of kind of the old guard. And they were also, like many, like we were talking about in Art Nouveau and also in the Glasgow Four, they very much embraced this inclusivity and embracing of all art forms. So again, the applied arts were equal to the fine arts. There's no distinction between them. And so basically the home was this building, the Secessionist building in Vienna. It was designed by Josef Maria Olbrich in 1900. Vienna was the fourth largest city in Europe, and it had this vibrant, very traditional art scene. And so this building was built and designed to exhibit the latest art and really express the goals in relation to growth and freedom. I don't know if you heard that chaos that just came in. I just had another dog join me right now. Here's that building. This is actually called the Golden Cabbage. This still exists to this day, and it got this like nickname of the Golden Cabbage. And this entire building was covered with type and covered with decorative elements. It was quite outlandish. Apparently on the day that it was revealed, people were rumored to be late to work because they couldn't tear themselves away from it. They were passing it on their way to work, and they couldn't tear themselves away. They couldn't be forced, they couldn't leave because it was so beautiful and so stunning and different from what was there before. So it's very much its physical and spiritual home, and it was used to showcase all types of art and design. And then their magazine was called Ver Sacrum, which means Sacred Spring. So one of the secessionists is Alfred Roller, and here's one of his posters. And I think it's interesting to look at, and something you can recognize in secessionist work is also the way they handle type. They really use it in a way where it has, again, this movement to it, and it almost, again, too, is inspired by nature. It's a little bit, it's treated with the same seriousness and equal to the imagery in the design. So you see, we've got this beautiful orb that looks like a moon reflecting on the water, but then we have the type being treated in that same manner and really trying to have the type and the image work together and taking both equally seriously. And a big thing about, as you can see from this building, it had a lot of geometric elements to it and very much an order to it, even though it was also highly decorative. And so this use of graphic elements, such as these triangles and then this decorative pattern in the background, is very symbolic of the secessionists, as well as the use of proportion. So one of them, a quote I thought was interesting. It said, "I knew that what mattered above all else was proportion." And I still think that's very true. I think in design, you need to have good proportion for it to be successful. So that was very much a ruling principle. Again, we're right around 1906. We're right around the turn of the century, right? And Coleman Moser is another really influential designer from the Secessionists. Here you can see these very tall, slim posters do share a lot of commonalities with Art Nouveau. But what I think is really intriguing about them, well, here, what I'm showing you here, these repetitive triangles are considered to have perfect proportions. And so that's kind of symbolic of secessionists. And again, this idea of proportions and structure. But then you've got these really strong, bold marks that you relate to Art Nouveau as well. And then also the color blocking that really kind of relates to the Japanese woodcut prints. And then their use of type, I think, is really interesting too, because they really, again, they're looking at it as part of the design, not secondary, not added on, but really part, equally important as the other elements in the design. To truly see that here in these absolutely gorgeous posters for the different exhibitions that they were holding at the Secessionist building. If you really, we're going to look at these again when we talk about the psychedelics, because you're going to see that movement, which happened in the 60s and 70s here in California, specifically in San Francisco. We're looking back to this incredible use of type and these just incredible letter forms that they were creating. I mean, look at the lack of negative space in these letters on the left, and then just the movement on the right. So cool. And I love looking at how these S's, like these long, extended forms, reach down into the type at the bottom. And then you have, again, these geometric patterns. And then this one here, we're going to talk about that here. This one is actually by Alfred Roller, and it was specifically to advertise Klimt's famous exhibition Beethoven Frieze, which happened in 1902 in the Secessionist building. And that was, I don't remember, like the top ever visited art show of all time at that age. It was incredibly popular, incredibly well attended, and we'll see a couple. So Klimt was very popular, and he's part of this movement in Vienna at that time. And his Beethoven Frieze, you've probably seen his work. He's got some very famous paintings, one called The Kiss. And then, but this was these multi-paneled that were across several different walls of the building and created almost an installation. So it was wildly popular, wildly well attended, and was very, very successful. And then this was the poster. So again, you're seeing all these geometric shapes and then this incredible use of type. And then here's some of the logos. So this was sort of something new that was starting to happen, the idea of having logos. I mean, you saw logos that are becoming more simplified, right? Because we saw the Kelmscott Press one from Arts and Crafts, and it was quite elaborate. So they're becoming more simplified and more, more using, these are their, the monograms, right? But really looking at these monograms as design and really playing with the type to create marks as opposed to just simply using their signature. And you can see that Gustav Klimt actually adopted this as his way of creating a signature on his painting. So it's like all these artists of the Vienna Secession had their own little logo. And I don't know who designed these. I couldn't find any reference specifically to, so I think it was a joint effort. But Alfred Roller, so their magazine was called Their Sacrum, and it actually had a very unusual shape. It was square, which can be a little challenging for designers, um, but it's really quite beautiful in their use of these patterns and the placement of the type and the placement on the page. So these were very serious magazines that covered all topics from art to design to politics to culture, everything. And then this other guy's, again, Coleman Moser, we saw a bit from him before. He worked on initials for so really worked on a logo. And I think these are just stunningly beautiful, these marks that he started creating. And I love seeing, look how he's working on graph paper, which, so if you're, I don't know if anybody in here is in my type class, but we're doing a very similar project right now. Then he also did these incredible patterns that were quite evocative, like quite, what's the word I want to use here? But these were all created for Var Sacrum. And you can see here too, we've got this female figure with these tendrils for hair, these flowers for hair. So this also makes me think of the work that was being done over in Uganda in the German counterpart to it. So ideas were crisscrossing and being shared and communicated and I don't want to say propaganda, but promoted. And so things were shifting and combining and being influenced by each other. So he's got these incredibly kind of, I don't know, loaded and like, I don't know, outrageous, like beautiful, evocative patterns that he was creating. And then I wanted just to end, because it's not really considered a graphic designer, and he didn't do a lot of poster designs, but it's an artist that I really love. So Egon Schiele was one of the secessionists artists at that time, and he did create a poster, but he's really more related with the fine art world, but I just really love his paintings. So I wanted to show his take on a poster, which is kind of an artist's take on a graphic design piece, because it's basically his painting that he put some type on. So there's a little bit of difference here, and I just think it's kind of fun, because if you look back at these other ones where they're a little bit more designed in terms of the inclusion of the type into the poster, in these cases, I thought it was just kind of funny to look at when a fine artist decides to make a poster for an exhibition, kind of the difference of it. So that was a whirlwind trip through the turn of the 18th to the beginning of the 19th or 20th, where am I talking? End of the 1800s into the 1900s, the 20th century, kind of what's happening, moving from arts and crafts to Art Nouveau. And at the same time in Germany, we had the Jugend and the Secessionists happening over in Vienna. And we'll take it up from there with a bit of we're going to take a little diversion and talk about something that's happening in the United States next week, that was shown over in Paris, and how all these things are melding together. All right. Any questions or comments? I saw some typos in there because I was trying to clean these up and make them more interesting than my other ones. So I'll fix those and I'll probably re-upload them, but the PDFs are in there already for you to refer back to.
You need to make a book.
A what?
Book.
When I get sabbatical.
Yeah.
I gotta get tenured first even to think about that. But yeah, I'd love to. There needs to be. What's that?
Make millions of dollars.
That'll be next career change. How about that? If I get one more. So okay, cool. So thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. I'll post the recordings, and I think everybody knows what's expected. You're going to be working on your color. I like to always just say I'm an inbox away. So if you have any questions, reach out and I'll get back to you. If you need any feedback, we're going to crank through these color part 2. So if you want any feedback along the way, but also know that with all projects, you can always resubmit after critique. So bring them in whatever shape you got them. Let's strive for getting them to the best of your ability. But if post feedback, you realize something could have been more successful, you're always welcome to make those changes. All righty. Okay, so be safe, be well, enjoy, or find some joy. How about that? And I'll see you next week if I don't see you before.
Thank you, Professor.
Okay, okay.
Bye,
Bye
everybody.
bye.
Professor. Thank
You're
you,
welcome. Bye
Professor.
bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.